Yesterday, Thursday, July the 28th, American fought American in the streets of Washington, the capital of the United States. 4 died. Many were injured, including women and children. The several thousand ex-servicemen out of work and broke have become known as the Bonus Army. They want the government to give them their army bonus payments now in 1932, instead of 1945 when they're finally due. Many have camped on the outskirts of Washington since last May, some with their families. Yesterday, they came face to face with the regular army. They expected sympathy from the troops. They were in for a nasty shock.
Buddy, can you spare a dime?
They told us, "We were the men who fought in the Great War to keep this country free and make the world safe for democracy. We built this country. Now we've lost our jobs, homes, everything. We come to ask President Hoover to pay our bonus now instead of in 1945. On Wednesday, the police stopped us marching to the White House. Then yesterday, about lunchtime it was, the troops arrived. Tanks. Cavalry. The lot. The troops were directed by the Chief of Staff himself, General Douglas MacArthur, and his aides, General George Patton and Major Dwight Eisenhower. This is the newsreel account.
After driving the so-called bonus army of ex-servicemen off the streets of Washington, the federal troops evict the rioters with gas bombs and set fire to their temporary camp.
All right, bring him out, Arthur.
Thank God, said the president. We still have a government that knows how to deal with a mob. Was this a mob? Was it, as some think, a carefully planned revolution inspired by the Reds in Moscow? Or was it just the way you'd expect men to act for what they believe is due to them, desperate after the disasters that millions have been suffering these last 3 years? Only 4 years ago, the president said the American worker was earning 3 times as much as a worker in Europe. As one of the bonus marchers said, "Sure, there was a bad patch after the war, but then we just got better off. It seemed like it would go on forever. Clothes, radios, vacuum cleaners, cars. We were building a great life." And now, this. It's like in the war, when you realized life was not the way you'd thought it. The current hit song says it all.
Once in khaki suits, why gee, we look swell, full of that Yankee doodly down. 500,000 boots went slogging through hell, and I was a kid with a drum. Say, don't you remember, they called me Al. Why, it was Al all the time. Why don't you remember, I'm your pal, buddy. Can you spare a dime?
What's gone wrong? After all, since the 1860s, the American economy has grown fast. There were huge energy resources, like coal, oil, and electricity to give power to industry. There have been plenty of workers to do the jobs. And there have been few trade unions, so there's been little trouble for the big, powerful companies. And immigrants have been a cheap supply of labor. And there's always been the American belief that anyone can be a millionaire if he works hard. All this helped America grow rich. By 1914, at the start of the Great War, America had already overtaken the European industrial giants and was a world power. The war made Europe poor. But it strengthened the United States. She lent money to help the Allies pay for the war effort, and she could sell her own goods worldwide without much competition. There was an unsettled time after the war, and then America's industrial machine got into gear, and 7 years of great wealth began early in 1923. 3 new industries led the boom: motor vehicles, electricity. Soon big hydroelectric projects were providing half of America's power. And there was the chemical industry. Vehicle production rose from 1.9 million in 1919 to 5.6 million in 1929. In 1919, Americans owned nearly 7 million cars. By 1929, just 3 years ago, it was over 23 million. A car, rather than a bathroom, was bought by many working-class families. Other industries have grown because of the motor car. By 1928, the industry used 80% of the country's processed rubber, 65% of its leather upholstery, 11% of its iron and tin, 50% of its plate glass. And it used 7 billion gallons of petrol. Sales of radios went up from $60 million in 1922 to over $800 million in 1929. This was just one result of twice as much electricity being produced in the 1920s. Radio was also one of the many ways in which the growing advertising industry sold the new products. Americans have become a gadget-conscious nation, filling their homes with consumer goods. The film industry, with its stars, has helped make it seem so important to look beautiful. By 1929, 1,500 face creams were on the market, and each year the average woman was using a pound of face powder and 8 rouge compacts. And to smell beautiful, there were 2,500 brands of perfume, and BO and bad breath now worried people across the nation. As well as movie film, the chemical industry was also providing plastics like Bakelite and rayon. In all this, the Republican government of the day seemed to play only a small part. They encouraged the view that the business of America is business, and that the businessman knows his business best. But to help industry, they did raise all import duties by the Fordney-McCumber tariff in 1922, and Americans were encouraged to buy homemade goods and food. And between 1926 and 1928, income tax was reduced, so people had more cash in their pockets. As a former car worker told us, wages were rising, of course, and we could afford more, especially with easy payments, high purchase. We used to come home from the movies every week with new ideas for clothes, food, and things for the house. Everyone was the same. Hoover said it all in 1928. We in America today are nearer to the financial triumph over poverty than ever before. The poor man is vanishing from among us. So why has everything gone wrong? Was it right that everyone should have believed so completely in the American economy and how well it was doing? Were there weaknesses people just didn't see? Could anything have been done to prevent the crash 3 years ago? Already, some things do seem clear. Key industries have grown weaker in the face of competition. The coal industry has faced competition from the oil industry. Railways have been threatened by the motor car. Cotton textiles are being replaced by rayon. Skirts have got shorter, corsets and petticoats abandoned. In 1914, 19 yards of material were needed for an outfit. By 1928, it took just 7 yards. And the farmers haven't shared in the good times, as this bitter socialist cartoon shows. All over the world, they've been producing more than the market can take. Prices of grain, sugar and cotton have fallen. So have profits and wages. Attempts to recover by producing more have simply exhausted the soil and pushed prices even lower. Many farmers have had to mortgage their farms and have gone deeper in debt. Many of them have had to sell up and leave, and they and their families have become homeless. The black population has also remained poor. Throughout America, the Negro has the worst wages, the worst jobs, and the worst housing.
Honey, till I make a little money. Oh, take it easy. Honey, till I make a little money. I'm trying hard.
Some may say all this is a failure of the capitalist system, and that it's just what Karl Marx said would happen. Industry has been producing too much, far more than people could buy. Wages have increased, but not as fast as company profits. Sales have been kept high by higher purchase. Some may blame the government for failing to control big business and the banks. Others, like John Maynard Keynes, the British economist, and Franklin Roosevelt, the new Democrat leader, believe government aid would help. Pump priming, they call it. Historians and economists will argue over it for years. One thing is certain. What has gone is confidence. While people have confidence in the future, they'll put money into industry and spend, and so make more jobs. But once that confidence goes, the skids are on. A lot of money, or capital, for industrial growth is got by the sale of company shares. People buy them in the belief that they'll get payments, dividends, or be able to resell at a profit. While they're confident, they buy, and share prices go up. During 1928, radio shares shot up from $80 to $420. The shares of DuPont, the giant chemical organization, shot from $310 to $525. In October 1929, confidence suddenly broke, and Wall Street crashed. Even millionaires like Rockefeller suffered great losses. For small investors, it meant disaster. Since then, political and business leaders from Hoover down have tried to make a worried America believe that prosperity is just around the corner. But prices and production have fallen. Unemployment has risen. Banks have collapsed. Poverty, hunger, and despair walk the streets. But why does all this matter to the rest of the world? America has been an important market in spite of tariffs to protect America's own goods. With the slump, that market has been reduced. Americans have provided capital for development in Britain and in Italy and in South America. Above all, America has put money into Weimar Germany, where loans made under the Dawes Plan had brought about some kind of prosperity. These loans have now dried up. Like Hollywood movies and Ford cars, economic crisis has been exported to countries whose economies still haven't recovered from the Great War. Since then, we've seen world trade collapse, unemployment rise, and political and social unrest follow. In Germany, the extremist parties, Nazis and communists, have gained support. What will happen this November in the American presidential election? Will Hoover persuade the voters that only he can stop the tide of revolution and socialism? Was this what yesterday's events were meant to prove? If Roosevelt wins, will he bring in his New Deal? And if so, could revolution follow? Let a bonus marcher have the last word. Okay, people speculated. They spent money like crazy, but the system encouraged it. Now men have lost their jobs, their homes, their families. They've lost belief in themselves. They'll support anyone who'll get them out of this mess. Me? I blame Hoover. He's done nothing. He just doesn't care.
Once in khaki suits, why gee we look swell, full of that Yankee doodly down. 500,000 boots went slogging through hell, and I was a kid with a drum. Say, don't you remember, they called me Al. Why, it was Al all the time. Why, don't you remember, I'm your pal, buddy. Can you spell